60 Minutes, Rewind.
A story we set out to report 6 months ago has now turned into two stories. How cigarettes can destroy people's lives, and how one cigarette company is trying to destroy the reputation of a man who refused to keep quiet about what he says he learned when he worked for them. The company is Brown & Williamson, America's third largest tobacco company. The man they've set out to destroy is Dr. Jeffery Wigand, their former $300,000 a year director of research. They employed prestigious law firms to sue him, a high-powered investigation firm to probe every nook and cranny of his life. And they hired a big-time public relations consultant to help them plant damaging stories about him in the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and others. But the Journal reported the story for what they thought it was. Scant evidence was just one of their comments. CBS management wouldn't let us broadcast our original story and our interview with Jeffery Wigand because they were worried about the possibility of a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against us for tortious interference. That is, interfering with Wigand's confidentiality agreement with Brown & Williamson. But now things have changed. Last week, the Wall Street Journal got hold of and published a confidential deposition Wigand gave in a Mississippi case, a November deposition that repeated many of the charges he made to us last August. And while a lawsuit is still a possibility, not putting Jeffery Wigand's story on 60 Minutes no longer is. What Dr. Wigand told us in that original interview was that his former colleagues, executives of Brown & Williamson Tobacco, knew all along that their tobacco products, their cigarettes and pipe tobacco, contained additives that increased the danger of disease. And further, that they had long known that the nicotine in tobacco is an addictive drug, despite their public statements to the contrary, like the testimony before Congress of Dr. Wigand's former boss, B&W Chief Executive Officer Thomas Sandifer.
I believe with nicotine it's not addictive.
I believe he perjured himself because I watched those testimonies very carefully.
All of us did. There was the whole line of people, the whole line of CEOs up there, all swearing that...
And part of the reason I'm here is I felt that their representation clearly, at least within Brown & Williamson's representation, clearly misstated what they commonly knew as language within the company. You know, we're in a nicotine delivery business.
And that's what cigarettes are for.
Most certainly. It's a delivery device for nicotine.
A delivery device for nicotine. Put it in your mouth, light it up, and you're going to get your fix.
You get your fix.
Dr. Wigand says that Brown & Williamson manipulates and adjusts that nicotine fix not by artificially adding nicotine, but by enhancing the effect of the nicotine through the use of chemical additives like ammonia. This process is known in the tobacco industry as impact boosting.
While not spiking nicotine, they clearly manipulate it.
The process is described in Brown & Williamson's Leaf Blender's Manual and in other B&W documents.
There's extensive use of this technology, which is called ammonia chemistry, that allows for nicotine to be more rapidly absorbed in the lungs and therefore affect the brain and central nervous system.
And then there are these documents, thousands of pages of confidential scientific reports and legal memoranda from B&W's secret files, which experts say support Dr. Wigand's claim that Brown & Williamson's executives have had strong reason to believe all along that nicotine is addictive and that their tobacco products cause cancer and other diseases. Most of these documents had been locked away in B&W's lawyers' confidential files in Louisville, Kentucky, until this man, a paralegal in that law office, Merrill Williams, walked off with them. The documents found their way to Dr. Stanton Glantz, a professor of medicine at the University of California Medical Center in San Francisco. It was Dr. Glantz and a team of scientists from the university who wrote about the documents this past summer in a series of articles in the Journal of the American Medical Association. What is the story that the documents told you?
They told me that 30 years ago, Brown & Williamson and British American Tobacco, its parent, knew nicotine was an addictive drug, and they knew smoking caused cancer and other diseases.
And Dr. Glantz says these documents reveal how Brown & Williamson was keeping that knowledge from the public.
And they also developed very sophisticated legal strategies to keep this information away from the public, to keep this information away from public health authorities.
Dr. Wigand said that a cigarette is basically a nicotine delivery instrument. That's what it's really all about.
Yes. Absolutely. And in the documents, they say that over and over and over again.
And finding a way to deliver that nicotine to the smoker's brain without exposing smokers to disease-causing pollutants like tar that come with tobacco smoke is one reason, says Dr. Wigand, that he was hired by B&W on January 1st, 1989.
They were looking to reduce the hazards within cigarette, reduce the carcinogenic components or listed carcinogens that were within the tobacco products.
They talked about carcinogens, too?
They talked about carcinogens.
They talked about cancer and heart disease and emphysema and all of those things, and they were going to work toward making a safer cigarette? You must have been very excited.
I was enthusiastic and energetic in terms of pursuing that.
Dr. Jeffery Wigand, with a doctorate in biochemistry, had spent nearly 20 years working in the healthcare and biotechnology industries. He says his goal at B&W was to make a cigarette that would be less likely to cause disease.
People will continue to smoke no matter what kind of regulations. If you can provide for those who are smoking and who need to smoke something that produces less risk for them, I thought I was going to be making a difference.
Brown and Williamson made Jeff Wigand vice president for R&D, paying him more than $300,000 a year in salary and perks.
You know, I was very inquisitive when I came on. Have you ever done any nicotine studies? Have you done any pharmacology studies? Have you done any biological studies? Have you looked at the effect of nicotine on the central nervous system? And always, in general, categorically, no, we don't do that kind of work.
But according to those thousands of pages from B&W and its parent British American Tobacco's confidential files, the company had in fact done exactly those kinds of studies. Dr. Wigand says he did not suspect there was anything wrong until he attended a meeting of scientists who worked for British American tobacco companies from around the world. Dr. Wigand says that his colleagues talked about working together to develop a safer, a less hazardous cigarette, a cigarette less likely to cause disease. But when it came time to write up their ideas, to create a documentary record of their discussion, B&W's lawyers intervened.
The minutes that came in were roughly about 18 pages long. I knew what was in the content. They were rewritten by Kendrick Wells.
Who's he?
Kendrick Wells was one of the staff attorneys at B&W.
And he rewrote the minutes of the meeting?
He rewrote the minutes of the meeting. He edited out the discussions on safer cigarette and basically toned the meeting down.
You're saying that one of the staff attorneys for B&W here in the United States, whose name was?
Kendrick Wells.
An attorney, rewrote the minutes of this research meeting with all of the research heads of VAT Industries.
That is correct.
In order to sanitize it, in a sense.
Sanitize it as well as reduce any type of exposure associated with discussing a safer cigarette. When you say you're going to have a safer cigarette, that now takes everything else that you have available and say it's unsafe, and that from a product liability point of view gave the lawyers great concern.
Kendrick Wells, the lawyer Dr. Wigand says deleted materials from the minutes of the scientific meeting, is now the Assistant General Counsel of B&W. Why would B&W lawyers like Kendrick Wells be so concerned? According to B&W's own confidential files, any evidence, any documents that show any B&W tobacco product, like Cools or Viceroy's, might be unsafe, those documents would have to be produced in court as part of any lawsuit filed by a smoker or his surviving family. And according to the lawyers, those documents could be disastrous for B&W. So the lawyers took over.
The lawyers intervened, and then they purged documents every time there was reference to a word less hazardous or safer.
But Dr. Wigand says the lawyers' interference, their editing and review of his reports, did not stop him.
And I started asking more probing questions, and I started digging deeper and deeper. As I dug deeper and deeper, I started getting a bodyguard.
What do you mean, bodyguard?
I went to a meeting. I now was accompanied by a lawyer. My bodyguard was Kendrick Wells.
Frustrated by the lawyer's intervention and presence at major scientific meetings, Dr. Wigand says he took his complaints to Thomas Sandifer, then the president of B&W. What did he say to you?
I don't want to hear any more discussion about a safer cigarette.
And he says Thomas Sandifer went on to tell him,
If we pursue a safer cigarette, it would put us at extreme exposure with every other product. I don't want to hear about it anymore.
All the people who were dying from cigarettes.
Essentially, yes.
Cancer,
Cancer,
heart disease, things of that nature.
emphysema.
Lawyers representing B&W and Thomas Sandifer have said that all this, as well as other accounts of conversations with Thomas Sandifer, are absolutely false. We asked Dr. Wigand what his reaction was to what he says was Sandifer's decision to abandon the safer cigarette.
I would say I got angry.
He was your boss.
I bit my tongue. I had just transitioned from one company to another. I was paid well, it was comfortable, and for me to do anything precipitous would put my family at risk.
You were happy to take down the $300,000 a year.
I essentially, took the money. I did my job.
So Dr. Wigand abandoned his idea of trying to develop a new and safer cigarette. He turned his attention to investigating the additives, the flavorings, the other compounds in B&W tobacco products. Many, like glycerol, which is used to keep the tobacco in cigarettes moist, are normally harmless. But when glycerol is burned in a cigarette, its chemistry changes.
Glycerol, when it's burnt, forms a very specific substance called acrolein.
According to the American Council on Science and Health, acrolein, or acrolein, is extremely irritating and has been shown to interfere with the normal clearing of the lungs. Recent research shows that acrolein acts like a carcinogen, though not yet classified as such. And Dr. Wigand says that B&W continues to add glycerol to their products. But it was another additive that Dr. Wigand says led to the end of his career at B&W.
The straw that broke the camel's back for me and really put me in trouble with Sandifer was a compound called coumarin.
Coumarin is a flavoring that provides a sweet taste to tobacco products, but is known to cause tumors in the livers of mice. It was removed from B&W cigarettes, but according to these documents, B&W continued to use it in its Sir Walter Raleigh aromatic pipe tobacco until at least 1992.
And when I came on board at B&W, they had tried to transition from coumarin to another similar flavor that would give the same taste, and it was unsuccessful.
Dr. Wigand says the news about coumarin and cancer got worse. This report, by independent researchers, part of a national toxic safety program, presented evidence that coumarin is a carcinogen that causes various cancers.
I wanted it out immediately, and I was told that it would affect sales, and I was to mind my own business. And I constructed a memo to Mr. Sandifer indicating that I could not in conscience continue with coumarin, a product that we now normally have documentation that is lung-specific carcinogen.
Right. Sent the document forward to Sandifer.
I sent a document forward to Sandifer. I was told that we would continue working on a substitute, and we weren't going to remove it because it would impact sales, and that was his decision.
In other words, what you're charging Sandifer with, and Brown and Williamson with, is ignoring health considerations consciously.
Most certainly.
After his confrontations over coumarin, Dr. Wigand says he was not surprised when on March the 24th, 1993, Thomas Sandifer, newly promoted to Chief Executive Officer, CEO of B&W, had him fired. And the reason for firing that he gave you?
Poor communication skills, just not cutting it, poor performance.
When Dr. Wigand, who has a wife and 2 young daughters, was fired by Brown and Williamson Tobacco, his contract provided severance pay and critical health benefits for his family. Critical because one of his children requires expensive daily health care. Several months after he was fired, B&W decided to sue their former head of R&D, and they cut off his severance and those vital health benefits.
They said I violated my confidentiality agreement by discussing my severance package.
Lucretia Wigand says that the firing and B&W's suspension of benefits was devastating.
We almost lost our family as a unit. Jeff and I almost separated.
Why?
Because he was under so much stress and so much pressure that it was something that we needed help dealing with. We went to counseling, and we've worked through it.
And this was, you think, triggered by the business with B&W?
Yes, I know it was.
B&W settled that lawsuit we mentioned and reinstated those critical health benefits only after Dr. Wigand agreed to sign a new, stricter, lifelong confidentiality agreement. Nonetheless, word of Dr. Wigand's battles with Brown and Williamson attracted attention in Washington, where in the spring of 1994, a Democratic Congress and the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, were investigating the tobacco industry. Dr. Wigand was contacted by their investigators, and after notifying Brown and Williamson, he talked with those investigators. Shortly afterward, he was stunned by a couple of anonymous telephone calls.
And in April 1994, on 2 separate occasions, I had life threats on my kids.
What?
We had life threats on my kids.
Dr. Wigand told us he doesn't know where they came from, but that, understandably, they frightened him. He described the threats by referring to his diary.
A male voice that was on the phone that said, "Don't mess with tobacco anymore. How are your kids?" Then on April 28th, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, relatively the same voice says, "Leave tobacco alone or else you'll find your kids hurt. They are pretty girls now." So I got scared. I started carrying a gun.
Really?
Yep. Started carrying a handgun.
Someone called and threatened to kill him and to hurt the family if he messed with the tobacco industry.
That was last August. Now, in February, Lucretia Wigand has filed for divorce, citing spousal abuse. Just one of the accusations Brown and Williamson is using in their full-throated campaign to discredit Jeffery Wigand. Today, 3 years after he was fired by Brown and Williamson, Dr. Jeffery Wigand is the star witness in a U.S. Justice Department criminal investigation into the tobacco industry, which includes the question of whether B&W's former CEO lied to the U.S. Congress when he said that he believed that nicotine was not addictive. But Dr. Wigand is paying a heavy price for his decision to testify, as well as for breaking his confidentiality agreement by talking to us. His family life has been shattered. His reputation has been tarnished because of B&W's massive campaign designed to silence him and to discredit this former research chief turned whistleblower. They're trying to do what they can to paint you as irresponsible, a liar.
Well, I think the word they've used, Mike, is a master of deceit.
You wish you hadn't come forward? You wish you hadn't blown the whistle?
There are times I wish I hadn't done it, but there are times that I feel compelled to do it. If you ask me if I would do it again, or if it, do I think it's worth it? Yeah. I think it's worth it. I think in the end, people will see the truth.
Well, these 3 men have seen the same truth as Wigand. They are the state attorneys general of Florida, Minnesota, and Mississippi, where Dr. Wigand is testifying in a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against the tobacco industry. Mike Moore is Attorney General of Mississippi.
Jeffrey's testimony is going to be devastating, Mike, to the tobacco industry. So devastating that I fear for his life. I think...
You serious?
I'm very serious. The information that Jeffrey has, I think, is the most important information that has ever come out against the tobacco industry. This industry, in my opinion, is an industry who has perpetrated the biggest fraud on the American public in history. They have lied to the American public for years and years. They have killed millions and millions of people and made a profit on it. So I hope that they won't continue to lie and try to destroy Jeffrey like they destroyed the other lives of people all over this country.
The campaign to destroy Dr. Jeffery Wigand began over 2 months ago in the midst of a media frenzy over our failure to broadcast our August interview with him. Brown and Williamson sued Dr. Wigand for talking to us despite his confidentiality agreement, and they got a court order in Kentucky to try to silence him from speaking out further. Then investigators hired by B&W fanned out across the country looking for anything they could use to discredit the whistleblower.
They've been going around to my family, my friends, digging up and digging here and digging there.
Then there are lawyers and B&W has a half-dozen major firms working on the Jeff Wigand case, their lawyers compiled the results of their nationwide dragnet into a summary that alleges that in recent years, Dr. Wigand pled guilty to everything from wife-beating to shoplifting. Beyond that, they charged him with a multitude of sins, from fudging his resume to making a false claim 3 years ago for $95.20 for dry cleaning. Then Brown and Williamson retained John Scanlon to get their story to the media. Scanlon is a fixture of the New York media scene who has close personal relationships with print and television reporters and producers, as well as editors and publishers. We asked him to sit down and discuss the charges he has been circulating to me and other reporters, but he declined. But Scanlon did make this statement to a CBS News camera crew.
He's running from cross-examination. His victims have decided to respond and present evidence that he is in fact a habitual liar.
The smear campaign has been very systematic, very organized, very well done.
My background is I have a PhD in biochemistry.
Today, Dr. Wigand is a $30,000 a year science teacher at a Louisville, Kentucky public high school. And his students, his faculty colleagues, and his family were stunned last month when a Louisville television station broadcast some of Brown and Williamson's accusations.
Court records show Wigand was charged with theft by unlawful taking and shoplifting.
Then the Brown and Williamson 500-page dossier on Wigand was given to the Wall Street Journal, who investigated the charges. And last Thursday, in this front-page story, the Journal reported that, quote, a close look at the file and independent research by this newspaper into its key claims indicates that many of the serious allegations against Dr. Wigand are backed by scanty or contradictory evidence. And they continued, quote, some of the charges, including that he pleaded guilty to shoplifting, are demonstrably untrue. We put that Journal statement to Gordon Smith, an attorney designated by Brown and Williamson to talk to us. The Wall Street Journal went through all of that material. It says that what the dossier that you put together, scant evidence.
Mr. Wallace, that's dead wrong. There's not scant evidence. The Wall Street Journal did not go over the scores, literally scores, of untruths told by Jeff Wigand that we showed to them.
And Gordon Smith went on at some length to say that Wigand's life, quote, is a pattern of lies. I don't understand, frankly, Mr. Smith. I really don't understand. Brown and Williamson must be in a panic if they're going after this man as hard as you are.
You're wrong. There are no material inaccuracies in that book. None whatsoever.
But not included in that dossier were Brown and Williamson's own personnel records, which showed that Wigand had received good performance appraisals for the first 3 years from B&W. In his 4th year, however, those appraisals turned sour. But despite that, even after he was fired, he received this letter from Brown and Williamson's personnel director. To whom it may concern, Dr. Jeffery Wigand was instrumental in the development of new products, as well as the major impetus behind a significant upgrade in our R&D technical capabilities, both in terms of people and equipment. During his tenure at Brown and Williamson, Dr. Wigand demonstrated a high level of technical knowledge and expertise. And this is on your own stationery, your own man saying bad about him.
Mike, Brown and Williamson refused to be a reference for Jeff Wigand after he left. This letter was negotiated with his attorney, and it was the only statement Brown and Williamson would ever make about him because Brown and Williamson did not want to be a reference for Jeff Wigand.
And Mr. Smith had this to say about our relationship with Jeffery Wigand.
You're being led along by a guy who's not believable. You're getting half the story.
Well,
You've got a vested interest in making this man credible.
Why do we have a
CBS has paid this guy $12,000.
For what?
I believe for consulting.
Now, wait just a moment. Let's get this straight. Paid him $12,000 for what?
To consult on a story for CBS.
For the record, as we explained to Mr. Smith, 60 Minutes did, in fact, hire Dr. Wigand 2 years ago to act as our expert consultant to analyze nearly 1,000 pages of technical documents leaked to us not from Brown and Williamson, but from inside Philip Morris, another tobacco company. At that time, Dr. Wigand told us he would not talk with us about Brown and Williamson, and he did not until over a year later.
I felt an obligation to tell the truth. There were things I saw, there were things I learned, there was things I observed that I felt that needed to be told. The focus continues to be on what I would call systematic and aggressive tactics to undermine my credibility and some of my personal life.
But you expected that, didn't you?
Well, I didn't expect to the extent that it's happened, okay? It's disrupted not only my life, I'm in divorce proceedings now.
These three state attorneys general say that no matter what B&W's accusations are, they remain convinced that what Wigand has to say about the tobacco industry in general and Brown and Williamson in particular is thoroughly credible. And they are suing the tobacco industry for the billions of dollars in state Medicaid costs their states have paid to treat people who have become ill from smoking. Minnesota Attorney General Hubert Humphrey III.
We want to see the full truth come out. We want the deception and fraud and the violations of our state laws stopped. And we want people that are making the money on this product to bear the full cost of the health care burden that is there.
Bob Butterworth is the Attorney General of Florida.
The issue has been deceit.
Deceit.
Pure and simple deceit. The cigarette companies made a decision that they would withhold valuable information from the American public, information that the consumer would need to make an intelligent decision as to whether or not they wish to smoke or not to smoke.
Again, Mississippi Attorney General Mike Moore.
I'm used to dealing with cocaine dealers and crack dealers, and I have never seen damage done like the tobacco company has done. There's no comparison. Cocaine kills 10, 15,000 people a year in this country. Tobacco kills 425,000 people a year.
Mike, it's absurd to suggest that tobacco is any way like cocaine in terms of addiction. It's absolutely absurd to suggest that. Brown & Williamson makes a lawful product. They sell it and make it in a lawful way.
Well, then why do 425,000 people die every year, according to all medical and scientific evaluations, die of smoking cigarettes? Why?
Mike, 50 million people choose to use tobacco and smoke.
So, on a cost-benefit ratio, it's only 425,000 people who die out of the 50 million.
No, Mike.
That's a small fraction? Is that the point you're making?
No, Mike, not at all. People choose to smoke. People choose to stop smoking. I think you used to smoke and you chose to stop smoking.
That's right.
It's their choice. It's a lawful product. It's marketed and manufactured lawfully.
B&W has questioned Dr. Wigand's character, but he says that's just a smokescreen, and he has some questions for Brown & Williamson.
Why don't they deal with the issue of whether they can develop a safer cigarette? Why don't they deal with the issue of knowingly using additives that are known to be carcinogenic in order not to influence sales? Why don't we deal with that issue?
Brown & Williamson did answer some of Dr. Jeffery Wigand's questions for us. They told us they have removed coumarin, that's carcinogenic flavoring, from their Sir Walter Raleigh aromatic pipe tobacco, but they insist it never posed a health risk to smokers. B&W lawyer Kendrick Wells declined to talk to us, but he did deny in testimony last week Dr. Wigand's charge that he had altered the minutes of that scientific meeting. And B&W says the truth will come out in the end when they get a chance to cross-examine Dr. Wigand under oath. And they insist that we, CBS, cannot report on this story objectively since we are indemnifying Dr. Wigand in B&W's lawsuit against him. 2 months ago, CBS agreed to do that after a leak resulted in the disclosure of Dr. Wigand's identity before he was prepared to go public. Though still unaware of where that leak had come from, CBS decided to take financial responsibility for the impact that leak had on Dr. Wigand because it exposed him to a lawsuit by Brown & Williamson. A footnote. This banner headline yesterday in the Louisville Courier-Journal, B&W's hometown newspaper, about charges their employers had engaged in smuggling and bribes in Louisiana. In that story, the U.S. Attorney in New Orleans says, look for some indictments in the very near future.